Today we're going to be picking up with example 4 on the fourth set of notes on solving polynomial equations. Yesterday we talked about the sum and difference of cubes. The lesson before that we talked about factoring by grouping. So today we're going to talk about our third and final method for solving polynomial equations. So notice in the problem we only have 3 terms, so again, factor by grouping is not an option. You need to have 4 terms to do factor by grouping. I would have to have 2 terms to do the sum or difference of cubes or the difference of squares, so neither one of those options are going to work here. Notice it's a trinomial, but it's a quartic trinomial, so we're going to go back to regular old factoring. And what I mean by that is we multiply our a times c and figure out the combination that adds to be b. So we are working with a combination that multiplies to be negative 8 and adds to be a negative 2. So the combination that we're going to use is a negative 4 and a positive 2. So regardless if you box or versus doing the other method, we are going to still factor the normal way. The only thing that's going to be different is that our first term is x to the 4th, and our middle 2 terms are now going to be minus 4x squared plus a 2x squared minus 8. And for my boxers, we will have these terms in each box, so x to the 4th minus 4x squared, 2x squared, and minus 8. So going back to the grouping method, I group my first 2 and I group my second 2. For my first binomial, I can take out an x squared, so I'm left with x squared minus 4. And over on my second binomial, I can take out a 2, and I'm left with x squared minus 4. For my boxers, you will have, for my first column, I could take out an x squared. For my first row, I could take out an x squared. Other column, I could take out a negative 4, and bottom row, I could take out a 2. So, regardless of which method you do, again, notice we get x squared plus 2 and x squared minus 2. Now, because the directions say factor, I would like you to factor completely. So the second binomial is the difference of squares, which we went over in the other lesson. So my a value would be x, and my b value is 2. So that second quantity is going to factor down to be x plus 2 and x minus 2. So I have my x squared plus 2 for the first binomial, and then x plus 2, x minus 2. So that would be our final answer. The form that we're dealing with is what we call a quadratic form. So this is an example of a quadratic form. So this is factoring. Next example has an equal sign, so now we're going to talk about how to, once we factor, how we continue and solve. So the next example, you're going to skip down to example 6 on your worksheet, and this will be our example. Notice it looks different because there's an equal sign. We're still going to go about it the same way. We're going to factor. Once we factor, we set everything equal to 0 and actually solve to obtain my answers. First step here, notice I have terms on either side, so I need to get all my terms on the same side of the equal sign. So we're going to start by subtracting the 12. So I'm dealing with x to the 4th minus x squared minus 12 equal to 0. And now we're going to factor, so I'm looking for my combination that multiplies to be negative 12 and adds to be negative 1. So we're going to be working with a negative 4 and a positive 3. So we'll have x to the 4th minus 4x squared plus 3x squared minus 12 equals 0. And those of you who box, go ahead and fill in all your terms in the box. If I group, I would group the first 2 and the second 2. My boxers, you would have your x to the 4th minus 4x squared, 3x squared, and a negative 12. Find the outside. So going up here, I have an x squared, and I'm left with x squared minus 4. My other quantity, my other binomial, I can take out a 3, and I'm left with x squared minus 4 equals 0. So now it's going to factor down to be x squared plus 3 and an x squared minus 4. Now, it just so happens that this problem is very similar to the last example that we did. So my second binomial is the difference of squares. So my a is x and my b is 2. So that second binomial will factor down to be x plus 2 and an x minus 2. So if the directions said factor, you're now done at this step. However, the directions don't say factor, they say solve, so I want my answers. My highest power is the fourth, so this has a degree of 4, which means I should get 4 answers. So I'm just going to switch the slide so I have more room. So I have an x squared plus 3, an x plus 2, and an x minus 2. Okay, so I need to get my answers, so I set every binomial equal to 0. Obvious 2 answers we have right here is that this one will give me an answer of -2. This will give me an answer of +2. The only one we have to do a little bit of work for is this first quantity. So if I set x squared plus 3 equal to 0, we actually need to solve that. So I would start by subtracting 3 from both sides. So x squared equals -3. Now to solve, I can take the square root of both sides. And our answer would be x equals plus or minus I square root 3. So, again, I told you your highest degree is 4, so I should get 4 answers. So here's one answer, there's a second answer, and this right here represents 2 answers. So there's my total of 4. So that's going to be all for today. Again, this was factoring and solving in quadratic form.